because you like local history, and there are two very noteworthy events going on later this month that have a lot of local history in them. I'm about to make an announcement, and I have folders I'll put back on the table if you're interested in attending. The first one is it's going to be the 49th annual Local History Seminars and Conference that takes place at Wayne State University. It's on April the 22nd and 23rd. They have I've attended for maybe 8 or 9 years, and they're really lots of fun. They're on a Friday, Saturday. The cost is very nominal, I think it's $15. And they have a whole litany of programs that go on simultaneously. You can pick and choose which ones you want to go to. A lot of popular subjects of a local history type nature. And they get a good turnout. The last couple times I saw a few people here attended, but they get about between 200 and 300 people that come down for these seminars. It's held at McGregor Institute, which is on the Wayne State University campus. There's a map showing you how to get there. The parking is nearby, and on the weekend it isn't that crowded to go down there. In fact, Saturday it's just a snap you put down there and park your car. But it's a very, very worthwhile put together. They have a lot of energy in it. And if you enjoy local history, you want to attend some seminars, look over these programs. You'll see what programs are being, what seminars are being offered. You just walk in, sit down with the other 30 or 40. You can move from one seminar to another all during the 2 days. I'll put these on the back after a while. And this is on the 21st and 22nd of this month. Before that, we have another one of a county nature. We belong, that is the Clinton River, or Greater Clinton Township Historical Society belongs to the Alliance of Historical Organizations for Macomb County. It's the Macomb County Heritage Alliance, it's called. And this has all the different historical organizations in the county that are members, commissions, societies, collectors, some are genealogists. They're actually, I was surprised when I saw the list of it, there are over 40 different historical organizations in Macomb County, ranging all over the county. And once a year we get together, this will be, I think this is going to be about the 9th or 10th year. I've been to at least 8 or 9 of them. They get together and they move it around from one place to another, and it's on a Saturday. And the different organizations have tables where they put different material out that you can look at, pick up, and they'll talk to you about any organizational meetings they have, anything that might be of interest. And then they have a report from all the different historical groups and societies. They like lunches served, I think it's $5 or something like that. And this year it's going to be down at the Warren Community Center, 14 Mile in Chicago. It runs from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and it's on Saturday the 29th of this month, last Saturday of this month. It's a fun thing, it's easy to get to, and you'll learn a lot about what's happening historically around Macomb County. I suggest both of these things. They both come the same month, so it's kind of jammed up a little bit. But if you're into history, and I think you probably are for being here, you would have a lot of fun at these. So I'll put them in the back table. If you have any questions later on, I'm glad to answer them for you.
Thank you, Don. Don, is this something? Don?
That one mine?
I think so.
Oh, yeah.
All right, I think that's all as far as announcements go. So right now I'd like to welcome Paul Weiss up here to give his presentation on the Mount Clemens Rose Gardens. He's been involved with it basically his whole life because it's a family business dating back, the 1920s, isn't it, Paul?
Right.
And so he's been involved with it since my son's age, who's like 18 months right now. So please welcome Paul Weiss.
Thank you. Is there anyone here this evening that worked at the Rose Gardens at any time? That's almost unusual, believe it or not. You did?
Not at the Rose Garden, but one of the greenhouses.
Okay. I ask because in our community here in Mount Clemens, there is quite a group, I don't want to call it a fraternity because it's truly made up of both of the sexes. There were ladies that worked at the greenhouse, especially at mine, for many, many years. But I am forever meeting someone who says, when I was 15, I pulled weeds at the Rose Gardens. And it seems that it's either that or the pottery. Those were entry-level jobs. When you were 15, 16, 17, you needed a summer job, or you just graduated from high school, and you needed that work experience, something to put on your resume. The greenhouses and the pottery provided that kind of environment, entry-level positions. What I'd like to do this evening is tell you about the greenhouses and the rose gardens, but more than that, to put a personality to it. Because there truly is. A business is the sum of the people who make it happen. And over the years, and the thing I miss most greatly about the Rose Gardens is that affinity to the people that I spent over 30 years of my life with. They are the essence of what makes a business breathe, what gives it its success, what gives it its failures. And all businesses go through those evolutionary types of things. So I'll try to give you a little background of how it all came about and why I think it lasted for 80 years. Just to kind of put it in perspective, maybe we'll begin where it ended. 1999, summer of 1999, my brothers and I have two younger brothers, decided to close the Rose Gardens. The competition from offshore roses had become so intense and so cost-effective for the people to whom we sold our product that we could no longer compete. They were able to bring roses into the United States, flying them from Bogota, Medellin, and Quito in South America, and Ecuador, and Colombia, more reasonably than we could grow them. Our cost of production was about 62 cents a stem in the latter years, and they were bringing roses in for 40 and 42 cents and making money doing it. So it was very, very difficult to compete. And so we made the difficult decision in the third generation of a business to close. What was it like? What was the status at that point? When we closed in 1999, we had been involved in the production of in excess of 300 million roses. That's one rose for every person in this country today. One rose. Or to look at it another way, it's 25 million dozen. Dozens were the unit of sale. That's 1 dozen roses for every person living in California today, if you count the illegal immigrants. So you can see that we touched a lot of lives over that 80 years. There are sadness. Roses are used for memorial occasions, when someone you love leaves us. It's happy occasions, marriages, births. So what you do as a cut flower producer is you impact people's lives. And you can see from that set of statistics that we impact a lot of people's lives. And it gives me great pleasure to know that that's what we did and what we were about. At the end, the greenhouses were just over 8 acres, approximately 350,000 square feet of covered surface. They contained 250,000 individual rose plants and produced, in those latter years, approximately 4 million roses a year for sale, predominantly in the state of Michigan. We did sell a little bit in Indiana, but we would go as far as the Sioux, as far west in the Sioux as Marquette, covered the entire lower peninsula, either through our own captive marketing system of wholesale houses that we own, or through independents. And at the day that we closed, we had 38 people on the staff. Probably about the lowest that we ever had. Numbers earlier on, in the beginning, probably would have been closer to 70, twice that number. We didn't have automation. All watering was done by hand. All opening and closing of ventilators was done by hand. The automation that came on later allowed us to become more efficient in our use of labor. We used upwards of 250,000 gallons of water daily. We pumped our water from the Clinton River into a 500,000 gallon settling tank where the silt that the river carries would settle out. Pumped it through the greenhouses. In fact, one of the first jobs that I had when I started with my dad was upgrading our pumping system. We had two 50 horsepower electric pumps capable of pumping in excess of 1,000 gallons of water, a half a mile per minute at a pressure of in excess of 100 pounds pressure. The motors on those pumps were as big as this electric. So we borrowed one of nature's gifts here, the river, and actually, just as a little aside here, we found out at one point in time that we acted as a huge filtration system. There was a period of time that we were putting an amendment in our soil called Terra-Green, and we were bringing it in by carloads up at the tracks at Stark's gas station, 50-pound bags. And our good friend Ray Tromley, the fishing guy, who was quite a conservationist in his own right, saw that going on, and despite the fact that he and my dad were drinking buddies, he wanted to know what Terra-Green was. So we told him, and we said, Ray, test the soil. We're not doing anything wrong. Go ahead. So we had the cooperative extension come in, and we tested the water as it came into our settling tank and through the drains where the beds drained back to the river. And we found out that there was less nitrogen going out and less other pollutants going out than at the intake. So that, when you're in a green business, it's nice to know that you're behaving in a green fashion, I guess. So that was something that we owe to Ray and his zeal to be able to prove. At the end, average work week, 56 hours. This is no part-time job. You work 5 days, 8.5 hours, 1 week. The next week, you work 7 days, but you only have to come in for the morning cut on Saturday and Sunday. And the third week in the rotation, you work 7 days straight through, 8.5 hour days. And so I'd averaged, I think, 56 hours of time at that point. And that meant, if it was your birthday, too bad. If it were Christmas, too bad. 4th of July, too bad. If you were in the rotation, you were in the rotation. We tried to make it so that no one worked more than one of the summer holidays. So you had 2 out of the 3 of Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day off. But other than that, something was happening. 7 days a week, 365 days a year, 366 if it was leap year. There was someone in the greenhouses 24/7. When we weren't cutting and tending roses, we had staff to tend the ventilators and the heating equipment in the place. And how much heating equipment? I'll tell you a little bit later about the heating plant that was our last heating plant, because it was the first major job that I had with my dad. But suffice it to say that there were 2 700 horsepower Cleveland fire tube boilers in that building, and to put it in layman's terms, that would have been enough to heat in excess of 400, 1,500 square foot houses. So we could generate some heat. Typical nighttime temperature, 60 degrees. Typical daytime temperature in July, By 9 o'clock, probably about 115. And the air is so thick you can cut it. But this is what I want to try to convey to you. Greenhouse is a living, breathing, evolving situation. It's never the same any 2 days. And that's the great thing about it, from my standpoint, why I love my career as much as I did. No 2 days are ever alike. Different sets of problems, different sets of victories, different sets of defeats, always something to do. You are never out of work. Believe me, you are never out of work. And it's different in the daytime than it is at night. If the moon's not shining, you can go into a set of greenhouses at 10 o'clock at night and put your hand right here, you can't see it. And yet you can hear the pipes snap with the steam. You know, we have tens of miles of radiant pipe for heating. And you can hear them crackle. You can smell the soil. You can walk down an aisle and feel the wind hit you a little bit because the eddy currents react differently when they come to corners and so forth, and you can actually feel that. And the fellows that were my night watchmen over for all those years would tell you that they could just sense it. If something was wrong, you could feel it, but you became that attuned to it. As I said earlier, business is about history, and it's about people. It doesn't seem like that, but that in the final analysis is what it really is. My family story starts way before the Rose Gardens became a part of our history. It starts in the country of Prussia in 1870. And for those of you who are not geography buffs, Prussia would be what is now Eastern Germany and Western Poland. It was an independent country, and in 1870, the Kaiser of Prussia decided that he'd go to war with the French. Well, my great-grandfather and his friend, Mr. Amling, who lived right adjacent to him on a farm in Prussia, decided they didn't like that program very well. They were both farmers, basically truck farmers, vegetable farmers. So they became, I guess there's no nicer way to say it than that, they became draft dodgers because they were going to be conscripted, and they picked up their families and they moved to Illinois. And they're good-sized families. These are farm families, 7, 8, 9 kids. And to put another personality on it, I guess I've probably been asked more times than I care to if my last name is Jewish. Might be. Who knows, when Martin Luther came through that part of the world, maybe my Jewish ancestors decided they didn't want to be Jewish anymore. But at least as far as I can go back, we are staunchly Lutheran, have always been and still are, and it was a very big part of my grandfather's history, and I'll tell you more about that. Anyway, the two families, and it's important, I want you to remember those two names, Amling, A-M-L-I-N-G, and Weiss, W-E-I-S-S, farms side by side, come to the United States to Des Plaines, Illinois. And where's Des Plaines? Well, it's a little bit north, a little bit west of Chicago. If you know where Benjamin O'Hare Airport is, that's where Des Plaines is. And part of the property that the two families acquired and farmed actually was within the perimeters of what is now Benjamin O'Hare Airport. And they did just what they did in Prussia. They grew vegetables. And there was intermarriage between the families, so they became kissing cousins, so to speak. And that's where the greenhouses started. Because these are frugal Dutchmen. These are hard-working, frugal Dutchmen. And somebody gets the idea, well, what if we build a greenhouse and started our seedlings out and got them a little bit bigger before we put them in the field? They'd finish faster, they'd be in market first, and command the higher prices. So that's what they did. But then, taking frugality even one more step, they said, well, we can't have a greenhouse sitting empty part of the time. What can we grow? How about flowers? So they started to grow flowers. Carnations, black-eyed Susans, things like that. One of the earliest pictures I have of my grandfather is in a, I shudder to say this, but it's in a house of carnations. He was working for his cousins in their greenhouse, helping them tend the carnations in between planting seasons for the vegetable crops. In 1914, my father was born in Oak Park River Forest, Illinois. Comes along, and his father is the first and only child. My dad had two twin sisters who were adopted, but the only child. And my grandfather said, well, another mouth to feed, I'm going to have to look for something else to do. What was he doing? He was trained as a mail secretary. Very common in those days. Very common. He'd been trained and educated as a mail secretary. My grandmother was a registered nurse. I won't give you all the sordid details, but as I said, it is about personalities. And that union is quite unique, because my grandfather met my grandmother when he was in the hospital. And he was in the hospital because he had a birth anomaly. It wasn't a big deal when he was real young, but it became a big deal later on, because basically his sperm didn't come out where a man's sperm normally does. It came out right up next to his body, and he was getting rerouted, I guess you'd say. And my grandmother was his nurse. They fell in love. I wouldn't even want to comment on how that may have all happened, but in any event, that is how they met. So my grandfather's been working for his cousins in their greenhouses, growing flowers, taking them in the Chicago market. And he decides this is a pretty good business. They're making money. It's World War. By now it's World War I, 1917, 1918. And my grandfather borrows his father's entire life savings, $30,000. Remember, his father's a farmer, just like his grandfather was. And he's a Lutheran lay minister. But he has enough confidence, I guess you'd say, to risk everything. And my grandfather was a middle child of 8, but he risked everything on my grandfather, who was, by that time, 25. Pretty gutsy guy. Pretty gutsy guy. But it paid off greatly. My grandfather was the true entrepreneurial figure. He was a risk taker, and by 1920, when he bought into the greenhouses that became the Mount Clemens Greenhouse Company and eventually the Mount Clemens Rose Gardens, he already had a partnership with his cousins in Des Plaines, another small greenhouse growing roses in Oak Park River Forest, pieces of 2 greenhouses in Pana, Illinois, and then to that pyramid scheme, he added the Mount Clemens Greenhouse Company, originally Weaver's Greenhouses. Bill Weaver. Paid his father back rather handily. As I said, business, and our business, is about people. So let's think about that period of time. World War going on. We get into it late, but still in all, we lose some doughboys over there. No sooner do they get back than there's a flu pandemic. Influenza kills hundreds of thousands of people in this country alone. And once again, folks, particularly ethnic inclinations, and we are an immigrant country, express their grieving in the use of flowers. And so it was a prosperous time, and one that allowed my grandfather to repay his father quite quickly. As I said, he came here approximately 1920 and went into a co-partnership with Bill Weaver. Bill was an older gentleman at that time, and the agreement was when Bill was ready to retire, that my grandfather would buy him out, and he did so in 1925. So my family has had a continuous sole ownership of the Rose Gardens from 1925 to 1999. I'm asked frequently, and I guess it's anybody's guess, why Mount Clemens? Why? Well, I think because Bill Weaver had a greenhouse he wanted to sell, and it was a pyramid of an entrepreneurial opportunity. But there are some other things that have been mentioned over the years. The market in Michigan, and particularly in metropolitan Detroit, has always been good. We're going through some tough times right now, but over most of the years, the income levels of people, working people here, were higher than they were anywhere else in the country. There was more unionism here. There were more manufacturing jobs here. We're regrettably losing a lot of those, but there were more of those types of things. People had money, they had disposable income, and so it was a good market. I think certainly Bill Weaver had located where he did his original greenhouses were on the east side of Cass Avenue, where our office was and what we used to call the A range. The original houses were 6 houses, 30 feet wide by 150 feet long. And that's all that was there when my grandfather bought into it, and he expanded it to much larger. He got it up to probably about 6.5 acres by the time he died in 1950. I think a very large motivating part of the whole program was a people part. Remember, these are heavily influenced German people, and this was a very, not predominant, but a very heavy German influenced area. You look at some of the old maps and you'll see the names of many German families here. The property that the Rose Gardens is built on was sold to Bill Weaver by a gentleman by the name of Gustav Schimmel. The Schimmels bought the property from the Duckwitzes. Before that, if any of you recall, the white farmhouse that used to sit off Cass Avenue, right in front, that's the Duckwitz family farmhouse. That was built about 1880. Somewhere out in that lawn still is the foundations for the silos. So that influence, I think, had a lot to do with it. Anybody here ever go to the Waldenberg bar and have a beer? It's been there for a while. Family names like Eschenbergs. Or while we're on the subject of beer, anybody ever go to Muckenhern's? Muckenhern's used to be up on the corner where Wilson's is, just down on the end. My mother threatened to burn Muckenhern's down more times than I can ever remember. So I think that Germanic influence was important. We went to church, Lutheran church, every Sunday, predominantly in Trinity Lutheran in Utica, because I had an aunt who lived close by, and it was a chance for the whole family to go out for brunch afterwards. We used to go to the Shamrock Bar and eat half chickens. I remember it well. But we also went to the Lutheran church, and I'm not even sure what the name of it is. The one that's on Canal near 19 in that area. Anybody know the name of that church?
It was Epiphany, but I think it's St. Paul's.
I was going to say, in Missouri Synod, it's usually Trinity, Peace, St. Paul's. I mean, you take a whack at one of those three, you're probably going to have a pretty good idea if you're a Synod member. Why do I bring that up? I can remember this big. Going there, first stanza in English, second stanza in German, third stanza in English, fourth stanza in German, and so on, forth and so on, and probably out to like 8 stanzas, because the Germans like to sing, and they sang the whole song. So that influence, I think, that Germanic influence here may have had some influence on bringing my grandfather here. It's possible, I guess. Well, so now we have 1929. We all remember what happened in 1929? Or at least you've heard about it. Stock market goes to hell in a handbasket, and stocks tumble, and the economy plunges into a depression. And now we have this young man by way of Prussia, out of Illinois to Mount Clemens, Michigan, who is in debt up to his eyeballs. Have you seen that one commercial where the fellow's talking about maxing all of his cars? How do I afford all this? I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. And he was. He owed money many, many places. But my grandfather was a persuasive person. And in the case of the operation here, he went to the principals at what was then the Mount Clemens Savings Bank, and he owed them $250,000. Because he had been building, as soon as he took over from Weaver, he started building more greenhouses on the east side of the street, then he started building on the west side of the street. And he went to the bank and he said, here's the deal. You put my account in the bank moratorium. There was a federal act called the Bank Moratorium Act. So you put it in there and protect me, and you will be paid every dollar of what I owe you. If you don't, you're going to get 10 cents on the dollar, and I'm going to be out of business. Well, as I said, he could be a pretty persuasive man, and they bought it, and he paid it back. But you had to get a little creative, and he did. My grandfather was a small man. He was only 5'7". His wife was 5'10". He was a bull Brummel. He wasn't your everyday average farmer. He didn't care too much for digging out in the soil. He was a director. He was the conductor rather than a member of the orchestra. He liked to dress well. He liked to, when he could afford it, to drive good cars and to live in nice homes. But he put it all away during the Depression. My father tells me that he had a Cadillac that was up on blocks for 8 years, and he drove a Chevrolet until everybody in the greenhouse could start to have a decent standard of living again, and then he went back and got the Cadillac down and started to drive it again. In 1937, my dad comes to Mount Clemens. He's graduated from Dartmouth. He has a master's degree from the Tuck School of Business in Dartmouth, and he's trained as a banker, works for a short period of time in the bank, but his father says, I need you in Mount Clemens to watch the operation there, so he comes to Mount Clemens. Very much different than his father. He's ambassadorial in looks. At that time, maybe not ambassadorial, but he's movie star beautiful. He's 6'4", weighs about 230 pounds, and he's a great looking man, and he's only complimented by the girl that he meets down at the end of Crocker swimming. The swimming had been a passion of his in high school and in college. He was a competitive swimmer at both those levels. He met Bernice Amanda Smith, my mother, and I know my mother-in-law remembers the beach down at the end of Crocker. I've heard several people. There used to be a raft evidently off the beach away, and they met on that raft, and the rest, as they say, is history. But where my grandfather shares my follically deprived forehead, my father had a full head of hair, and is much taller than both of us. So he comes to Mount Clemens, and Mount Clemens is a wide open, fun town in those days. People work hard, but they play hard. My dad told me you could take $1 into town and drink beer for 10 cents a bottle, take another $1 and find a pretty girl to dance with all night long. And Daddy did. He's a single guy up until 42. He met my mother in about 40. And it was one of those typical situations. I'm going off to war. You want to get married? It's the one non-Lutheran thing that probably ever happened to the two of them. They couldn't be accommodated in the Lutheran church for getting married as quickly as was required. So they were married in the Presbyterian church in Mount Clemens. But at that point, my grandfather has to come to Mount Clemens to take over for his son, who's been drafted. Eventually is sent to Cairo, Egypt, to run a post-exchange in Cairo. My grandfather splits his time actually between the White House. They live about 6 months of the year in the White House that was on cast, and 6 years back with some of the other greenhouse operations that he had also been able to hang on to. He lost a couple of them, but he hung on to the better part. Another big greenhouse, bigger actually than the Rose Gardens, called Premier Rose Gardens in Des Plaines. He hung on to that, so he divided his time in between. The war years, I think it is absolutely accurate to say, made the fortunes of the Weiss family. Once again, rationing, people getting married, just like my mom and dad did, just like Hope and Harry Bates did. Unfortunately, we're losing young men, and that has to be celebrated with weddings and rationing and all those things. And probably rationing as much as anything. There were only so many things that you could buy. Anyway, the bottom line is, during those days, and I still have financial statements to prove it, we used to net 50 cents on every dollar that we sold. Unbelievable. Never, ever came even remotely close to it any other time. But for those 4 years, 41 through 46, 50 cents on every dollar. It set the base for the wonderful lifestyle that my family has enjoyed since, and there's just no other way to say that. I mentioned that my dad married Ernest Smith. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. He was supposed to marry a gal by the name of Joanna Hill. In southern Indiana, there's a huge set of greenhouses called Hill's Greenhouses. And Joe Hill and Paul Weiss, my grandfather, were kind of kingpins in their business, at least east of the Mississippi they were. And they figured, let's make a dynasty out of this. Kids are about the same age, we'll hook them up, get them married. Well, unfortunately, the two children didn't quite see it the same way, and my mother came along, and for those of you who may remember her, she was beautiful. She was movie star pretty. So, would have worked out well. Could have been a real empire in the rose growing scheme of things, but it didn't happen that way. 1943, August 12th, yours truly comes on the scene. Probably not too important, except for one kind of interesting little family tidbit. I become the third generation in my family who will eventually grow roses, and all three of us are born in August. My grandfather's birthday is on the 8th of August, mine's on the 12th, and my father's is on the 17th. I don't know if that means anything particular, but I think it's just kind of an interesting little aside. Now, also in 1943, something happens that really enables these prosperous years to happen. But it's also a rich part of your history here in Clinton Township, Mount Clemens area, and one that not very many people know about. And that is that many, many people were being drafted. And because the skill levels involved in being an inside farmer basically are not exactly rocket science. It's difficult and it's challenging, but it isn't like being a tool and die maker, where maybe you can get a deferment and stay at Willow Run building bombers. So the fellows in the greenhouse are getting drafted left and right. And my grandfather is tearing out his hair, and it's falling out when he doesn't do that. And he said, what can I do? So here's about the internment camps for the American Japanese in California and in Arkansas. For those of you who may not be familiar, the American Japanese were, and I am talking American born. In their language, in the Japanese language, that's referred to as Nisei. Nisei means you were born in this country, you're second generation. Issei means you were born in Japan but spent most of your life here. And predominantly these are Nisei people. 1, 2, 3 generations of being an American. And they are put into what can only be categorized as concentration camps. There's no pretty way to say it. If you've ever seen pictures of Manzanar out in California and some of the other camps, they're clean and they're orderly, but so was Dachau. And so was Auschwitz. There's no difference. And my grandfather hears about this and he goes to the federal government and he says, you know, these people are Americans. What happens if I vouch for them? Can I bring them to my greenhouses in Illinois and in Michigan and give them a job and some dignity again? And there were programs like that and the ability to do that. And so he did. He brought 12 Nisei Japanese families to this area. Some of them lived in apartments that were built for them on the greenhouse proper. But more importantly, most of them lived in duplex homes and small converted residence hotels in Mount Clemens, on Church Street, on North Wilson, several different places. They went to school here, they had children here, and this community assimilated them into our social structure, and to the best of my knowledge, and I've talked to a number of people about this, both Japanese and people from this area, without a problem. I think at a time when our country sought to segregate these people because of how they looked, not who they were, that speaks so eminently well for what kind of people we are that I can't tell you how proud I am that you did it and your ancestors did it, and more importantly, how proud I am of my grandfather. There was a time that when I would go to California and they'd say, you're Fred Weiss's son, aren't you? Yep. What's your name, son? I was 22, 23 years old. My name's Paul. You're Paul Weiss's grandson. Yes? You don't have a bill. You can't pay for dinner. You can't buy a bottle of beer. Where do you want to go? Would you like to take my car? You couldn't. My grandfather was venerated in the Japanese community in California. And it is just a wonderful piece of history here. As I said, that everyone involved had that kind of openness and willingness to understand and see people for what they really are. Interestingly enough, as part of that story, in 1947, the team from the Mount Clemens Greenhouse Company won the Recreational League's Hardball Championship. It was predominantly a group of Nisei Japanese players. Most of the team was Nisei Japanese. But as history will have it too, there was a big guy behind the plate, the catcher. Well, in the passage of time, he became my father-in-law, because that was Harry Bates. So things happen in rather interesting and intertwined ways. It's amazing how circles close and things come around. And that's just a little bit of personal family history and so forth. When you get a chance later on, I've got some things displayed here. I think what I just told you tells you that my grandfather was a true believer in the opportunities that this country makes for its immigrants and its people. And he was very big in the Mount Clemens area in the sale of war bonds. He was influential in several of the war bond drives, and these are some advertisements that the Greenhouse Company paid for and that went into the Macomb Daily and basically asked people to consider purchasing war bonds to support the war effort, U.S. savings bonds. Right after the war, we built a few more greenhouses, about another 30,000 square feet, a small, modest addition. And we haven't much more than got them open. And all of a sudden, this part of Clinton Township becomes a lake. 1947, April, the last great 100-year flood that this area has ever experienced, because shortly thereafter the spillway was dug as a relief for the Clinton River system, a relief for that system. But in 1947, the whole east side of Clinton River Road and Cass Avenue was under 2 feet of water. I have a picture someplace of my uncle and my dad in a rowboat inside the greenhouses. It's really probably the first active memory I have of my grandfather. I would have been, what, 3 years old? Yeah. We came into the greenhouse in a dump truck, big high wheels, and when they were getting ready to load us, they put a couple fellas up in the bed. We had dump trucks because we heated with coal, and I'll get to that in a while. But they kicked the tailgate up, and then it just clattered to the ground and clashed, and then everybody jumped up, and my dad reached down and just kind of popped me up into the bed of it, and off we went to see what things looked like. We drove around because the dump truck was so high, it could go through the water. Didn't last for very long, but we didn't have to water the rose plants on that side of the river for quite a few days afterwards, because they were under for a long time. It's about this time that I get my first paying job at the Rose Gardens. Good father that he was, my dad takes me to work quite frequently on Saturdays. But good patriarch that he was, my grandfather said, if he's going to be here, put him to work. Give him a job. And so he had a custom set of watering boots, custom made for me. They're like, maybe call them Wellingtons, if you know what I mean. It's a rubber boot that comes up to about here. Well, he had them made for me about yay big. And he would have one of the greenhouse workers stretch a hose down this 150-foot block and turn it on. Remember, this has got 100 pounds of pressure on it, and I probably weigh all of about 35 pounds at this stage. So they'd turn it on, and I'd brace and squirt water on one side, down the other, or go back and forth. And I had to water those two benches every day, and then I'd go throughout all the greenhouse, being careful as I crossed the road, put out buckets, and fill the buckets about halfway with water. Because the practice in those days was that as a cutter would come out of a row of rose bushes, carrying maybe 10 roses, maybe 110, just depended. They were immersed in a bucket of water as soon as he cleared that bench and was up in the main line. So they had to have, over the weekend when they didn't have time to do it, they had to have it, literally hundreds of buckets laid out ready to immerse the roses in so they could instantly start drawing water. Well, that was one of my jobs. And this was the other one. Once again, for those of you who've lived in this area for a while, you probably recall that for many years at noon, the pottery and the rose gardens would sound their whistle, telling the community that it was time to go to lunch. There were no hour lunches in those days, half an hour. The whistle went off at noon, it went off again at 12:30. And this was mounted on the top of a 3-story power plant, which was located on the west side of the street. You may recall there was about a 150-foot smokestack there at one time. And a lanyard came down through that 3-story building to a piece of wood tied onto the chain, and it would go up and actuate this arm. My grandfather sat there with his pocket watch, and he'd look, and he'd look. He said, "All right, Paul Everett, pull it now, and keep pulling until I tell you." Pull, sound it for maybe 15 seconds, let go. Okay. Then we go and do something for half an hour. Go look at some of the rose bushes or talk to some of the men while they were having lunch, one thing or another, and he'd look at his pocket watch and then we'd go back. As soon as it was that time again, all right, same thing, keep pulling, like that. And I'd get to make the noise, and he'd say, "That was good, you did a good job. When you work, you get paid." That's how it works. He put his hand out, and you know, you always remember things like that, like his hand is like a catcher's mitt, right? Well, as I said, he wasn't a real big man, so it wasn't like that. But I could have all of any one kind of coin that I wanted. Well, there were a lot of pennies, so I took a lot of pennies. He always used to say that we stopped playing that game when I found out what quarters were. There's another cute story about that point in time and so forth. I mentioned my grandmother and the whole Germanic ethic. They didn't speak German at home. Sometimes guests would come, but my grandfather was fluent. If he could, if he needed to, but he didn't. But at 10:30 on Saturday mornings, my grandmother made breakfast. She made poached eggs because my father and my grandfather loved them. Poached eggs, a lot of toast. I didn't like poached eggs then. I don't like them now. But in my family, if it's on your plate, you eat it. And when you're 3.5 or 4 years old, you speak when you are spoken to. My grandmother's table sat 12 people comfortably. Father on one end, grandfather on the other end, me in the middle. Remember, you don't talk until we talk to you. My grandmother never sat at that table. We were there precisely, in the best of Germanic traditions, precisely at 12 or at 10:30, because that's when she was ready. But the German way was that the men got together in kibbutz, talk business, whatever. My grandmother sat in the kitchen, ate by herself, checked on us from time to time to see what else we needed, and that was just the way it was. I've always found that to be probably male chauvinist is the only way to really say it, but it didn't seem to bother her too much. You know, sometimes the things that we take exception to today weren't made such a big deal, and I'll get to a few more of those as we go along too. Well, let's come down through the decades a little bit. 1950, my grandfather dies. Remember I told you he was kind of a bull Brummel and a little bit vain? Well, I guess you could say vanity killed him, because he had a curse that's been passed down to me, and I've passed down to my children. He had eczema and seborrhea, and he took x-ray treatments to try to cure it. Massive x-ray treatments before they had any idea what it was about. And in 1950, at the age of 60, he died of melanoma, of a self-inflicted, basically, skin cancer. That time, in the 50s, we're heating with coal. The power plant originally built in 1926. And we use 6,000 tons of coal a year. We stockpile twice that amount on the grounds. So we always have 12,000, 13,000 tons of coal on hand at any given point in time. How much is that? The typical gondola car that you see on the railroad tracks going by, 60 tons. So it's 100 cars of that. And those are all unloaded by hand. You pop the doors in the bottom of them, and if you're lucky, some of it slides into the conveyor belt system that's underneath. But if it's been cold, especially down in West Virginia where it came from and it rained and it freezes in the car, you pop the door, 3 pieces fall out, and then you break out the kerosene torches and the sledgehammers and you beat the rest of it out, beat and push it down into the conveyor system, into a 70-yard truck, to the greenhouse, up another conveyor, into a stockpile. Then when you need it, you load it back in the dump truck, take it to a dump place. It's dropped in a pit where a conveyor system takes it up to 2 big hoppers that store it, and it's self-fed by steam feeders into the boiler, into the heat drums of the boilers. We're suffering a little bit at this point in time by having not had an awful lot of innovation in rose varieties. Many of the varieties that we have been around for a long time. Red American Beauty, Better Times, which was a rose named after the hope of coming out of the Depression successfully. But they're starting to play out. All roses are the creation of a genetic crossing of traits between 2 different colors. There is no such thing as a black rose. Black is the absence of all colors, and if you have to have 2 parents of different colors, even though it may be in a minute amount, and I've seen roses that are quite close to black, it's an impossibility, genetically impossible. Well, I've graduated now from my whistleblowing, and my dad doesn't want me to become indolent and spend too much time learning how to play tennis or any of those things that my mother would rather have me do. So he says, you know, I want you to enjoy your youth, but I also need 7 weeks out of every summer for you to be doing something at the greenhouses. So I pulled weeds, I pushed wheelbarrows of dirt in and out of the greenhouses, because in those days, before steam sterilization, we used to completely empty the bench of dirt, first of bushes, then of dirt, carried that all outside, and then brought all brand new in. A piece of property over here on Canal Road that they're now developing those condominiums in that we own, and that's where we got our dirt. We take it out of there, put the old stuff back in, plant sedan grass on it to get it fallow and mellow again, and then just continue that process for many, many years. So I'm doing that. I'm getting to come home from a date at midnight, sleep for 2 hours, go to the Rose Gardens, get a truck, and go to the Eastern Market so I can be on the market when it opens at 4 o'clock in the morning. Selling not our first class product, but something we used to call funeral roses. They had a little kink in the neck where they're a little too open, didn't pass our grading system. So I'd take a couple thousand down and see if I could sell them to a little grocer here, or, you know, marketplace, just whomever. But every Saturday for several years, that was something to help me build character. And I've been told I'm quite a character, so I guess it must have worked. In the early 60s, a rose comes along that is the salvation of the business and rekindles our ability to be competitive. It's called Forever Yours. It's a red rose. In those days, and probably going back to the very beginnings, red roses were the core of what we did. They represented somewhere between 80 and 85% of numerically of product that we grew. A little bit of yellow, a little bit of white, a little bit of orange, a little bit of pink, but red roses is what it was all about. And Forever Yours comes along and really rekindles the whole business, gets it back to good profitable status again. And it's about that time that I come on the scene full-time, September 3rd, 1966, over my father's, I wouldn't say strenuous, but extensive, not opposition, educational effort. I called him after having, I was educated similarly to him. I have a bachelor's in business administration. I don't have a master's, but I have a bachelor's. And my major's dual major, economics and banking finance. And I went to work for stockbrokers for about a year. And I was getting an ulcer at 23. And I think because I'd been around the greenhouses for so many years, I always felt that that's where I would end up. Any other career was kind of a backstop, something to do in a dire emergency. Always wanted to be in the greenhouse business, and I think I always knew I was going. So I called my dad and told him that's what I wanted to do, and he wrote me a 2-page, single-spaced letter on every reason in the world why I shouldn't do it. And I called him and said, I read your letter. He said, did you read it twice? I said, yes, sir, I did. I still want to do it. Okay. So the rules are going to apply to you just like everybody else. Today, we start people here at $1.55 an hour. That's what you're going to make. And we work 60 hours a week, and that's how long you're going to work. And I'm going to rotate you through every department in the greenhouse, because if you're going to give orders around here someday, I want you to know what you're asking people to do. Okay? He said, but I don't want to, you do have a degree. I don't want you to think that I don't love you and I don't want to give you a chance. So when you're done working in the greenhouses, if you want to earn another $100 a month, you can keep the books for our distribution company. So you did take accounting, did you? Yes, sir, I did. I said, well, good. You want to earn the extra 100? Sounds good. I'll do that. And that's how it started. I make them sound like a curmudgeon. And anybody who ever read one of my dad's letters, by the way, would have a real experience. He was very gifted in the use of the English language. He wrote beautiful letters. I wish I could write anything as magnificent as that. But he was actually, he was a great dad. And just as his grandfather had trusted my namesake, or the person after whom I'm named, he trusted me in 1969. So I'm 26 years old. He says, Paul, we need a new power plant. There's too much handling with this coal. It's hard on equipment because of the abrasiveness and so forth. We've got a new power plant. And he says, I want the best power plant that you can build me for $200,000. Do not, I repeat, do not spend more than $200,000. And I said, okay, well, what kind of equipment? He says, you didn't hear what I said. I want you to build us a new power plant. He said, you don't have to come to me for anything other than draws against the construction. You tell me you need $50,000, I'll put it in the account and make sure that it's there to pay your bills. But other than that, I don't want to know about it. I have other things to do. It's your baby, you build it. So he gave me a $200,000 budget. I did things that people told me along the way had never been done before. I took a fuel oil tank that was 12 feet in diameter and 50 feet long, basically the size of a small mobile home. In those days, a single wide mobile home in those days. And I rolled it off a lowboy truck. When J.J. Levy from Oakland County Gas and Oil, was a great friend of my dad, found out that I'd done that, he just shook his head. He said, Fred, did you know that he was going to do that? You can't do that. I said, J.J., I was right there when he did it. It really worked kind of neat. I put sand up on one side, chains back to the low boy, and just pushed it with a tractor. Rolled off, rolled up into the sand, sat there just as pretty as you can be. And I saved myself $4,000 in crane costs. When we built the building, which was situated in between the two ranges, right along Clinton River Road, you remember the blue sheet metal building that was there for so long? All the equipment, the two 700 horsepower boilers, a very sophisticated water handling and water treatment facility within that. I spotted all the equipment on the concrete slab and then built the building around, because that saved me a lot of rigging costs. Those boilers are 30 feet long, 8 feet in diameter. Pushing them through a little door requires a lot of special tools and extra work. You could just take them off a low boy with a crane and put them where you wanted them. Worked fine. So we threw like tarps, put them there, threw tarps over and built the building over. That wasn't the way that things were normally done either, but I was so young and dumb that I didn't know that the difference, I don't think. I had the powers of my conviction and wasn't afraid to take a chance. And there you go. I built it, had engineers from Chrysler brought in by the equipment salesperson to see it. And all the floors are color coded with walkways, every pipe is color coded. This is a nice power plant, young man. This is nice. What did this cost? About $400,000? No, sir. And the equipment man that brought them in, especially to set them up. But what did it cost? So I built it for building, slab, equipment, the whole thing for $169,000. And they just shook their head. At the end of the day, my dad asked me, how much did you spend? I said, $169,000 in change. He said, write yourself a check for the difference. I was making pretty good money. I made $25,000 a year that year. But $30,000 bonus didn't sound too bad either. But in the best tradition of one of my baseball idols, Al Kaline, who turned down $100,000 because he said he wasn't worth it, I told my dad, that's what you paid me for. I don't want it. And I didn't take it. I figured I had to do something when I got there in the morning, and something at the end of the day, and that's just the way it was. 1970s brought on some difficulties because we had oil embargoes. Gas lines, you might remember those. And the power plant that I built had a dual fuel capability to burn natural gas, or for any of you old salties, see Paul back there, he was a CB, we burned bunker C, heavy oil. This is oil so heavy you can walk on it if it's not heated. It has to be heated to about 130 degrees before it'll even start to flow, and probably 150 to 160 degrees before it'll ignite. And we were burning oil because it was a little dirtier, a little bit more maintenance, but it was cost effective. And all of a sudden the prices just started to go like that. Not unlike what's been happening here recently. Once in '73, and then about 3-4 years after that again. And we raised the price of roses, and then they'd go up a little bit, and we'd raise them again, and my dad would just shake his head, because by this time I'm running the marketing end of things as well. And he said, how much more do you think they'll pay? I said, nobody's saying no yet, so I'm going to keep asking. Well, that took our fuel bills to a range of about $250,000 a year. That's a lot of roses when you're selling roses for 60 cents, 70 cents a piece. It takes quite a few to do that. But business is still good enough. We do the last of our additions. We build another 30,000 square feet of greenhouses and complete the B range to what it was originally designed to be. I was the general contractor in building those. And for those of you here, eventually some of those last houses are going to be situated right out here, because when we dismantled the greenhouse, we worked with the historic folks over here and dismantled about 5,000 square feet greenhouses and donated that to the township to be erected for whatever purpose they might wish. It's been in storage, and I'm understanding that they're starting to formulate some plans to turn it into kind of an arboretum type of situation. The greenhouses would not be glazed in any way, they'd be open to the sun, but it's in storage, and probably won't build quite as much as 5,000, but we'll pick or they'll pick a number that's manageable, and maybe 1,000 or 2,000 square feet of those greenhouses that were built in 1975 will be re-erected here to memorialize the part that the Rose Gardens played in this community, along with the beautiful mural where you see that we're acknowledged right here in this facility. And I'm always very proud that they thought highly enough of us to include us in that. During the 1970s, I had a fascinating experience of my own. We had a mission from China, Communist China. And one of their very biggest bigwigs in the agricultural field came to go through our greenhouses. I still have some gifts, very small gifts. The Chinese believe in giving gifts. They're like the Japanese in that respect. It doesn't have to be something that's very expensive, but it's an acknowledgement of your generosity and sharing your time with them. And I have those packed amongst my mementos. They ask a lot of questions. How many people worked here? How much area? They were just taken aback by the fact that my family owned 75 acres of ground, but most of it was for investment purposes or for soil, that we were only basically utilizing 8 acres for greenhouses, and then if you take the support buildings and the driveways and so forth, maybe 12 acres. And it's just astounding that we didn't utilize our resource to a greater extent and more densely made a utility of that area. But it was fun to have that. In the 1980s and 90s, we experienced the new competition coming from South America. There was Colombia and Ecuador, particularly Ecuador. Ecuador is today the largest exporter of roses to the world. It's right on the equator. Day length is good. Most of the South American greenhouses do not have heat, so they're built at an altitude where the temperature is conducive to rose culture. And we started to see that whole part of the markets really take off. I am a lifelong Republican, but I may never forgive George Bush the Elder for something called the Andean Initiative. The idea of the Andean Initiative was that we were going to take all the farmers in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, who were growing drugs, and we were going to turn them into flower farmers. And we we're going to make it easy for them to bring their flowers to the United States and sell them. And they'd see the wisdom in that, and they'd stop growing drugs and grow flowers instead. Well, we can see that worked very well. But it really did open up a flood of product coming to this country, and not just of roses, of all the traditionally greenhouse cultured flowers, carnations, chrysanthemums, particularly. In the mid-'80s, there were approximately 5,500 greenhouses of 10,000 square feet or more in this country that devoted their attention to the production of cut flowers. There were approximately 300 of those that were exclusively rose growers. By the mid-'90s, 10 years later, there were only 600 cut flower producers in the United States, and most of those were in California. And there were less than 100 rose growers. When the Clemens Rose Gardens went out of business in June of 1999, we were the largest producer of roses east of the Mississippi. We'd always pretty much been in the top 15, 20 nationwide, but that made us the largest producer east of the Mississippi. So you can see basically the Andean Initiative and the importation and globalization of our industry gutted the American cut flower industry. There's no nice way to say it, it's just what's happened. It's regrettable, I guess, but it is a part of life. Now, I don't want you to think that everything is nose to the grindstone, don't have a good time, because it wasn't. I'll tell you a couple of stories. I'm going to leave out last names to protect the not so innocent. Because some of the things that used to go on at the Rose Gardens, and I imagine it happened other places too, would never happen today. The concepts of sexual harassment, so forth and so on, wouldn't ever allow it to happen. They had a packaging foreman. His name was Rick. He retired 3 times. Ended up spending 52 years of his life with the Weisses. 52 years. The 3rd time he retired, I said, I'm not giving you another party. I've had 2, that's it. Just get the hell out of here and stay home. Go play golf, go bowling. Well, Rick ran a female crew. And the rumor was, at least, that if you wanted to project your position on that crew, that occasionally if Rick said, why don't you come in a little early tomorrow, that maybe wasn't a bad idea. And so something happened in the back room for a short period of time, and everybody was one big happy family, and everybody knew about it. Just the way it was, end of story. His boss, my father, knew about it, turned a blind eye. I mean, you even conceive that happened, but it's the truth. We had 2 employees, one gal from the grading department, one who was a section foreman, married to different people, but at least heavily in lust with one another. The joke was, at noon, don't be by the exit to the parking lot. They would go daily down on Dunham Road, make love, and come back, all in 30 minutes. I think that's pretty fantastic. But true story. They had a young gal by the name of Terry, back in the 70s. She was a real flower child. Built like a boy, and that's being kind. But Terry was a free spirit. It'd get hot in the greenhouses, and believe me, when I said it could be 115 degrees with 95% humidity, I'm not kidding. It gets that way early and it stays that way. We started at 6 o'clock in the morning to be done by 2:30 to try and beat the worst. Long about noon, Terry would take off her t-shirt and just work topless for the rest of the afternoon. And not one man on that crew ever complained. Another time, I said Rose Growers, they worked hard and they played hard. We used to go on something that was called a Rose Ramble. The producers of rose bushes that we would buy would collect 50, 60 of us, put us on buses. But it started at one collection point, maybe in California or maybe out east someplace, and we'd go and see greenhouses for like 3 days. We'd start drinking about 8 o'clock in the morning, and usually conclude about 1 o'clock the next morning, sleep for a few hours, and then get up and do it again. When we're on one of these trips over in Canada, and the liquor laws and liquor availability over in Canada is a little bit different. So it's been a real quiet trip. The boys are, just looking for something to kick your heels up a little bit. So I'm riding back here with my general manager, Larry Anderson. I said, Larry, what can we do to spice things up for these guys? They're bored to tears. Well, we have the gal in the grading crew, again, in fact, Rick's daughter, who was a free spirit. And we said, I bet if we ask Sue to serve coffee and donuts tomorrow topless, she'll do it. we'll have to pay her, and we'll have to make sure the rest of the girls on the crew are okay with it, but I'll bet she'll do it. So we popped the question bright and early the next morning, and she said, I'm in. $50, I'm in. Well, when that crew came in, and it was time for coffee and donuts, and Sue came around delivering, I'm told that at least 3 very expensive Nikon cameras got jammed. They were trying to auto-load. And I know that's a little risque, and I don't mean to diminish the operation by that. My dad, by the way, was not very happy. That was my stunt, and he was not very happy with that. He didn't think it was in the best keeping of the operation, but I became a legend for about the next 10 years. And it really was meant as pretty innocent fun, and it was taken that way, and it was the context, once again, of the times. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the people that were parts of the crew. Walter Rourke was our office manager for many, many years. He started with my grandfather and stayed with us, I think it was 45 years. We had a lot of people who stayed for 25, 30, 40 years. Rick, 52 years. Walter stayed for over 40. His cohort in the office, John Hable from Utica, stayed for over 40. And couldn't have hurt him too bad because John's still alive, living out in Arizona, and hasn't changed very much. I saw him not too long ago, and he looked just the same. George Segura, I mentioned the Nisei Japanese. After the war, most of the Japanese families went back to the West Coast. But George Segura stayed, he and his family. And George worked for us for over 40 years. He was actually my mentor from the cultural standpoint, the hands-on, how do you grow rose bushes and make them behave the way you want to. George taught me that. But he also taught me about respect and honor and hard work. I've never ever met a man in my life who had a greater work ethic than George Segura did. He was the last person to sit down for lunch. He was the first to get back up. He was the first person in the building in the morning. He was the last person to leave. He was a wonderfully dedicated person. We went to his family's home on New Year's Day every year without fail for as long as I can remember. It was my dad's way of acknowledging, as his employer, just the great gift that George had given to the whole operation. And I mentioned the Nisei and how they worked into the community and the baseball team and so forth. George's son, George Jr., went in the military during the period of time just after the Korean War. George is probably 3-4 years older than I am. Rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel, married a Caucasian girl from this area, and lived happily ever after. And he's part of our story too. Charlie Kepsel worked for over 40 years. Some of you may know the Kepsel family name. They've been German name, been around for a long time. He stayed till the day we closed the doors. Larry Anderson was my general manager when the responsibilities around the greenhouse fell to me. And he's spent over 30 as he came on 2 years after I did, so he had 31. I think I had 33, 34 at that time. John Pennington was second in command in the office. And John's, he did over 25. He's interesting because he came from rose growing stock. His mother was a tinkler. And the tinklers used to have greenhouses on Floral Avenue right across from the Remulin's place at Floral Avenue and right near the Lewis ranges. So I got a legacy when I got John to come on board with me. At our greatest, we certainly were one of the centers of rose production in the United States. We were at one time in excess of 500,000 rose plants in production in the metropolitan Mount Clemens area within several miles. Floral Avenue greenhouses, Tinklers Lewis, North Gratiot Rose Gardens ourselves. And at that level, definitely one of the, especially before California really came on strong, probably one of the top 3 or 4 concentrations of plants anywhere in the United States. So I hope I've given you a little bit of an insight that while growing roses and growing millions and millions of them and impacting people's lives with what you do is interesting statistically. Really, the things that are interesting are the personal stories, the body stories, the sad stories. You become a family. You spend more time with these people than you do with your own family. It becomes a brotherhood. We had an occasion last summer to draw back 10 of the employees who were there at the end. My brothers and I had made a commitment to them that when our property sold, that we would put together a severance package for anyone who had over 10 years of longevity. And we brought them together to make a distribution of those checks, which were given to them tax-free. And it started out, let's have a few beers and a sandwich at noon. My wife will tell you that at 8 o'clock we were still talking. Just as with me, if you ask them, you know, would you do it again? They'd say, yeah. Do you miss it? Every day. And I do. With that, you know, I'll be happy to try to address any questions that you may have. I've gone on for over an hour and 20 minutes. That's way
How will we ship the road out to the distributor?
All right, good question. In the very early days, we shipped much more distant than just the Michigan market. We shipped to Pennsylvania, to Ohio, Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, and a lot of that was done by rail car. We had boxes made that, believe it or not, they sent back to us eventually. Looked like little coffins. Seriously, it looked like a coffin for a young person. And we made our own ice. Would line the boxes with wax paper, put the roses in, ice them down, nail the box, go up here to the Grand Trunk and put them on and send them all over. I mean, you see some of the lists, it was amazing, particularly when you think trying to do that kind of thing in the summertime. Very difficult to do and still maintain your quality. So as our ability to market our own product came, we shipped everything in water. I mentioned, you know, some of the almost promiscuous profits of the war days. There was a tax in those days called the excise profits tax, which basically meant that if you were making a lot of money, you had two choices: either give it back to Uncle Sam or invest it in something that would be good for the economy. My grandfather acquired a couple of wholesale house locations, one in Saginaw and one in Battle Creek, with some of the excess profits. My father had already started a marketing arm in Detroit called Floor Express in 1939. And so in those entities, we would truck to them, for instance, to Saginaw. We would load a refrigerated truck at the greenhouse and take it to Saginaw with everything in water. But we've used Greyhound, we've flown product all over the country. Actually, we were privileged when Jerry Ford was President of the United States to provide roses for the White House for 2 weeks. Those were flown. I'd get up, I graded those roses personally. I'd get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and grade them and package them, and then I'd have somebody take them to Metro to fly them to the florist that serves the White House. And we've shipped to, at some points in time, to the Rose Bowl parades until California became a major producer on its own. So several different ways, but more and more in water, in buckets of water. Yes, sir.
What's going to happen to all your property out there?
Well, the property has all been sold, and it's all going to be developed as condominiums. The piece of property that I described that's just over here is being developed with condominiums right now. and the piece on the corner of Cass and Clinton River Road, the 51 acres over there, will be condominiums as well.
Can I have your attention, please? It's 8:30.
The lowlands there, I understand that they're down in the floodplain, that they're going to clean that up a little bit and put some bike paths, exercise trails, that kind of thing in.
And if you need to call to arrange for a ride home, please do so now. The library
Anybody else?
closes at 9 p.m.
Yeah, I know. That's why I got, see, you get me going on my favorite subject, and it's pretty hard to stop.
Did you say that they use the same mostly for the pottery around the Rose Gardens?
No, but I mean, that's very similar to what both of them would have had. They ran off their heating plants. Of course, the pottery had steam for the operation of equipment and so forth. And so they would have had one. It was always maybe almost a little competition to see who could be most correct in terms of when is it time to go to lunch. And of course, if the pottery sounded off a minute earlier, maybe people could get an extra 2 minutes out of lunch if you really played your cards well. Oh, was that our whistle? Yeah.
But the people in town recognize the pottery whistle and the Rose Garden whistle.
Right, well, the pottery be a little closer and so forth. But I appreciate the opportunity to be a little nostalgic with you, and as I said, because it is my whole life. I love to talk about it, and I love to just reminisce for my own sake as well. Invite you to look at a few things that I brought that we received in 1993, the Michigan State Florist Award for being Grower of the Year in the state of Michigan, and so I brought that along. Some of the war bonds posters that my wife and I had framed and kept. The beer bottle opener is only fun, not because it's a beer bottle opener, but because it was a giveaway that we used to give to customers and friends and so forth. But it has the Howard phone exchange on it for those of you that remember the days of HO. So please enjoy those for a few moments if you'd like to. Remember when we only 4 digits. Thank you again for your patience, and I hope you enjoy it.
That's my maiden name. That's why I bought it.
They're all friends. Lutheran Church.